Hi, I'm Mike from Craft Supplies USA, and today's video is going to be all about the 40/40 grind. What it is, how to sharpen it, why you need it, and why you got to give it a shot. So what is the 40/40 grind? The 40/40 grind is going to be when you have your bowl gouge, specifically an elliptical or parabolic fluted gouge with a 40-degree wing and a 40-degree nose bevel. This is going to accomplish a lot of different things while we're turning, and we're going to get into that a little bit down the road. First, we got to cover what this is, how to sharpen it, and then we're going to go to the lathe and show you all the different cuts that make the 40/40 so special. So the last few months I've been trying the 40/40 grind out, and I've really fallen in love with it, and I've ground pretty much all my bowl gouges except for a couple with this grind, and it does a lot of really amazing things. We can slice and peel at the same time, we can get extremely good cuts on end grain fibers, and we can peel away massive amounts of material, which we'll show you once we get to the lathe. But it's a really exceptional grind, and we were talking with Stuart Batty, and we wanted to figure out exactly where the 40/40 came from, and he told us when he was 16, turning for his dad, they were doing production spindle turning, and he wanted to get faster. But using a Skew to do a bunch of slicing cuts, it takes 10, 12 cuts to get a good surface and remove the right amount of material. And he needed something faster. So he took his bowl gouge, ground a 40-degree nose on it, squared up the wings at a 40-degree angle, and he was able to slice those end grain fibers and peel massive amounts of material out of the way. So he was able to get his work done quicker so he could go have fun. So I've been trying it out. I've really fallen in love with this grind, but the barrier to entry for this grind in particular has pretty much always been the freehand grinding aspect to get the right wing and the right nose bevel. And what we've got here today is we've come out with a 40/40 degree Raptor. This is going to be different from our standard 40-degree Raptor. This one's going to be able to give us the 40-degree nose and the 40-degree wing angle that we need to make this tool work the way it should. And I think we figured this out. We've got our Raptor set up for the correct distance we need for our V-arm. We also have the correct face angle on our Raptor to get that wing angle at 40 degrees. We're going to cover all the setup, how to sharpen this, how to sharpen it right. And there's a lot to cover in this video, so we'll break everything down into chapters. So if you already know how to sharpen, you can skip through to the turning things, see if there's anything new you might want to learn about using the 40/40 grind. And in addition to the 40/40, we also brought in a 55-degree Raptor. That way it's a good in-between gauge for between the 50 and the 60-degree Raptors. Great for bottoming gouges or just your traditional bowl gouge grind. So we've also got this as well. So when we were getting this 40/40 set up, I've turned a ton of different projects with the 40/40 side by side with all my other bowl gouges to see exactly what difference in, different feel I got off the tool, as well as the surface finish and the amount of energy required to make the same cut. And roughing bowls out, it's unbelievable how efficiently this clears the shavings. We're cutting into side grain and peeling that material away. It removes it at a lot faster rate, and it's a lot easier to make the same cut. If I'm turning at the lathe for 8 to 10 hours a day, and I can do if I'm doing 1,000 cuts and they take half as much energy, I'm going to be a lot less tired at the end of the day. So having something that's, one, leaves a perfect surface finish that's easy to sand, it doesn't have any torn grain, any tear out to deal with. That's extremely important for me. Ease of sharpening is extremely important. I suck at freehand sharpening, so I don't want to have to freehand sharpen. Two, how much energy does it take to make this cut? Do I have to sit there and really white knuckle control this tool as I'm making this cut? Or can I just let the tool float and remove a ton of material? So all these things, testing these out with the 40/40, I'm not trying to sell you on it, but after turning and spending countless hours at the lathe with this tool, I think it's something you should really give a shot. So let's get the grinder set up. We'll show you how to sharpen it, and then we'll go to the lathe after that. All right, so let's cover the sharpening, how to get this set up for a 40/40 grind. And there's going to be a lot of little different tips and tricks compared to our standard Raptors. There's going to be a different setup, a different way to sharpen, and that's what's going to give us the result that we need to get that 40/40. First thing we need to do with our gouge, so I've got a robust gouge here. When we're getting that 40/40 grind, this has to be done on a parabolic or elliptical flute. Doesn't work on V flutes, doesn't work on the U flutes, like your bottoming gouges or your spindle gouges as well. The flute depth isn't right to get a 40/40. So make sure you have the right type of gouge you're going to be sharpening for a 40/40. And let's start by setting up our platform. So with our jig here, I've got my platform nice and close to the wheel, and I'm just going to set this down until the face of my Raptor right here is nice and flush, and we're contacting the 2 points just like we do with our standard Raptors. Once that's set, we can lock it down. So the first thing that we need to do is we're going to be setting our tool here on the platform, and we're going to be grinding the wings of our gouge to have that nice straight 40-degree wing. And the thing to look out for when we're doing this is because we're sharpening on a wheel that has a convex curve, we're going to be creating a hollow in our wing of our gouge. So as we do this, we're going to start there and then we're going to rock this gouge back and forth on the wheel, straightening the wing out and making sure we have a nice 40-degree wing that's nice and flat and straight. So let's show you how to do that. We'll show you the progression of the wing as we grind it. But first, let's get our safety glasses on. Obviously wear a dust mask or have your vacuum going, pulling the dust out of the air. And once we have this locked down, everything's nice and secure, let's get this ground. So we're going to start with the flute on the platform, and I'll start by engaging the nose of my gouge. And you can see I'm just rocking it slightly. Just rocking the tool on the platform, and we can use something flat, a nice straight edge, to check to see if that wing is nice and flat. That looks pretty good to me. Let's show a nice close-up here. So we've got a nice flat wing, and you can see now we've got a flat where our cutting edge is, and now that's going to be our guide to grind this back to get the right wing angle that we need as well. I'm just going to check both wings to make sure I wasn't holding the tool off on an angle. Make sure you keep your tool nice and in line with the wheel and you're not doing it off on an angle. If we do that 5 degrees off, one wing is going to be drawn back a lot further and it'll have a different angle than the other wing. We want this to be nice and symmetrical. So make sure as you're grinding this, we're going to start with the nose and then just rock that to flatten it out so we don't have a convex swoop in our cutting edge. And the great thing is once you have your wings set at 40 degrees, unless you over grind and draw the wings back or grind too much on the nose, you're not going to have to reprofile that very often. That's going to be something you do every now and again, or if you just screw up your grind once we go to the V-arm. So once you've got that wing established, we've got that nice 40-degree wing on there. We'll just show a little close-up here. So now that we have our 40-degree wing angle established, and we have a nice guide to grind the cutting edge back to have a really sharp edge, let's cover setting up our V-arm and the protrusion gauge to get that 40-degree nose bevel. So first, let's move our platform out of the way. And for the 40-40, we need a 3-inch protrusion out of the tool holder as opposed to a 2 or a 2.5 or a 1 3/4 depending on your grinder. So we've got a 3-inch protrusion gauge here and we've got our Varigrind jig. So with the Varigrind jig, let's go ahead and put our tool in here. So we'll set that to 3 inches and lock it down. The next thing we need to do is adjust our leg angle on our Varigrind jig. It's going to be a little bit different than our traditional Raptors. Normally we have a 23-degree leg angle to get our traditional grinds, but for the 40-40, we need to loosen that leg angle and we're going to bring that all the way up to the top. It's going to be 17 degrees for this tool holder to get the right angle on our tool. Once we have that set in place, we're going to be using that same Raptor to set our V-arm distance. And as we're talking about this, because the leg angle is set so low, if you're using a tool that's got a handle on it, and depending on the shape of the handle and everything, you might contact your V-arm because the tabs are really, really high. So you can see here, I've ground and cut this off because I don't need all that excess metal up top, and it was keeping me from rotating this through on my handled tools. So if you, depending on the type of gouges you're going to be sharpening, you might need to just go to, get a hacksaw and just chop that off to where it's flush with the top of that V-arm. But once we have that and we know we can rotate this tool freely and we're not going to be impeded by the wings here, we'll set up our Raptor and our jig here. That's just going to be nice down in the pocket like normal, and then setting up to where these 2 points contact our wheel. Once we do that, we can lock that down. We'll set this off to the side and let's just cover everything again. We're establishing the 40-degree wing angle with the platform. We're setting 3 inches of protrusion from the front of the tool holder here. We're setting the leg angle at the very top of our Varigrind jig, 17 degrees. And then we're setting our V-arm with the Raptor and we've cut the wings off. So there are a lot of differences here to get that 40-40 just right. And it is going to be ever so slightly different than a freehand ground one. It's going to be more consistent because we're in a jig. But just most guys just don't have the skill to really freehand this. And if you needed to, you could always set your platform back up and check the wings. And you could always even freehand grind the wings and then come back over to this and then grind the nose and blend it to the wings. So as I sharpen this, I like to keep my hand down here on the V-arm and I'm going to be using that as the main support, and then my left hand is just going to be swiveling this back and forth. We're going to start out with the wing. Just rocking this back and forth as we get the steel removed. And I want to make sure not to over rotate this and draw the wing back. I want these wings at the same length, and we want to keep this nice and symmetrical. Got a fair amount of steel to remove on the nose there. And again, when we're sharpening this, depending on how much steel you need to remove, just keep that cup of water there to keep the tool nice and cool. We don't want to overheat the steel. So right now I've gone over the nose, and you can see I've got roughly the same amount of steel all the way around that I still need to remove. I'm just trying to keep it even. I don't want to get to a finished edge on one side before I move on. I want to kind of do this all at the same time to keep everything nice and straight, nice and even. Again, make sure you don't over rotate when you swivel that over, because that's going to draw that wing back, and we want these to be nice and straight at a 40-degree angle. If we over rotate and we draw that wing back, that's going to change that more to like a 35 or a 30-degree wing angle, because it's going to be removing all the steel back here on the top of that wing and flattening it out. So we don't want to do that. Again, just dip that in water just to keep it nice and cool. I don't want to see steam coming off the tool, and I should be able to hold that after I just dip it in water to make sure it's not getting too hot. And I'm just very, very light pressure on the wheel. It's just barely skimming that surface, getting us right to that inner edge of the flute. I don't know if you can see that there, but there's just a slight glimmer, a little bit of a facet on the top there that we still need to get ground to, so we're almost there. I'm just checking to make sure I don't have any flat spots on my cutting edge, and I've got a nice sharp edge. The left wing and the nose is done, and I've got just a small amount of steel on the right wing to remove still. Alright, just a tiny bit more on the wing, and then I'll just do one pass across the nose just to round it and smooth everything over. And that should be it. Let's take this out of the jig and take a look. I think we've got our cutting edge though. Alright, so I've just taken the tool out of the jig. I'm just inspecting my edge, making sure that we have a nice flat wing on both sides. And we'll show some extreme close-ups here at the table in just a second so you can get a real close-up view of how this edge looks. But both wings are nice and flat. I don't have any low areas or high areas. And with this grind in particular, because we're looking for that perfectly straight wing for the spindle cuts that we need to do with it, this one's going to be a little bit trickier to grind, and it's easy to over grind or under grind. Whereas with a convex wing, where we've got that raise to it, it's a lot more forgiving when you're getting your wings ground. So this one, you want to take your time when you initially set this up. Just make sure you get the nice straight wing, and then once you're set, it's easy to just quickly reprofile, resharpen, and get a good cutting edge back on it. But if you're getting just a standard bowl gouge, you're going to put a 40-40 on it. Take your time, make sure you get that 40-degree angle on the nose and the wings, and that they're nice and straight. But let's go to the table real quick. We'll show the close-ups so you know exactly what the grind's supposed to look like, because that's one of the hardest things too. Is a lot of guys, when they're freehand grinding this, they don't have a properly ground 40-40 sitting there that they can grind to make it look the same. So. All right, before we show the close-ups of our main cutting edge, I'm just going to throw a secondary bevel on this tool. Generally, you want the main bevel to be about 1/8 of an inch long. That's going to minimize the bevel bruising you get on pieces, and that's going to keep that from leaving those little ridges down your piece as you go and make a curve on a bowl. So to do that as well, so this is set up for my main bevel, and I'm just going to bring my V-arm in about 1 inch, and you can play around with the depth on this. There's not any hard and fast rule. It all depends on what kind of secondary bevel you want. And I'm just going to eyeball that there, but that looks pretty good. All right, that secondary bevel, again, we're just removing steel off the bottom heel of our tool here. That's just gonna give us more clearance so we don't have that steel rubbing our piece as we go in to make a bowl. We've got about an 1/8 inch, just a little over an 1/8 inch, about a 3/16 of a main bevel. But let's go to the table and we'll show the close-ups of this gouge. All right, so you can see here we've got our main bevel is about 1/8 of an inch. We've got that heel removed. And let's just get a straight edge and just check our wings, and you can see we've got a nice straight wing on both sides. We've got our 40-degree wing on the top, we've got the 40-degree on the nose, and if we rotate this over, you can see nice symmetrical grind. All right, so we're at the lathe, we've got our tools sharpened up. We're gonna show you a bunch of different cuts where the 4040 really excels on spindle projects and bowl blanks. So to start out with, with the origin of this being to speed up spindle turning for Stuart Batty, we're gonna start out by showing you some different cuts we can do on the spindle blank. And first we need to get it to round, so we'll be using the spindle roughing gouge. And the spindle roughing gouge is gonna be a peeling cut. And what we wanna talk about that's going to be really important are the 4 cuts and turning. So we have the peel cut, the shearing planing cut, the slicing cut, and the scrape. So all of those are going to come into play with the 4040 and these other tools we're going to talk about. But let's go ahead and get this to round. We've got our tool rest set up. We'll bring this up to speed. And we're just going to knock the corners off here. All right, we've got that pretty much to round here. We're just turning a piece of ash. And the spindle roughing gouge, this really excels on side grain. All this material right here, this is all side grain, this is all end grain. And this tool in particular, this is a side grain specialty tool. This cuts really well on the side grain, but on end grain fibers, it digs in, it doesn't cut them clean. And obviously you can't use this on bowls because of the flat tang, it'll snap off. So side grain specialist tool. And if you think about this tool, this is exactly what a bottoming gouge looks like, except for the flat tang. If you look at your bottoming gouge, very similar flute profile, same grind roughly. Obviously a steeper angle on our bowl gouge. But the bottoming gouge is a side grain specialist as well. So think about it this way, when we're cutting into the side grain, we're peeling these fibers, the side grain fibers, we're peeling those up, and that's giving us a good surface on side grain, and it's good for bulk removal. Obviously, if we slow the feed rate of our tool down, we'll get a cleaner surface, but that's what this is for. All right, with my spindle gouge being a 40-degree on the nose, and then the wing or our bevel on our 4040 grind being a 40 as well, we can peel with the wing of this gouge on spindle blanks as well. So when we peel on a spindle blank, we want to make sure that we get that nose and get our bevel support first. Otherwise, this thing's going to skate and turn into a thread chaser. We just go to make a cut and we have that flute tube open, it just wants to cut threads in. So I'm gonna put my thumb behind the gouge, make sure I lock it in. Once I have bevel support, I can rotate that flute open and we can peel with this gouge very, very efficiently, and we can remove a ton of material. So let's do that again. We'll do a full wing cut. So you can see there we're taking the entire width of the cut, or the width of the wing here. This is a 3/8 bowl gouge, so a 1/2 inch bar. Wing's a 1/2 inch, and we can remove tons of material very efficiently. Let's do it again. I'm gonna pick it up here, so we're gonna be with that flute closed about 230, and once we have that bevel support, we can open that flute up, drop the handle, and we'll arc it to center. And we arc that to center just like we do when we're peeling with the Skew. If you've seen the Skew video, that's the same technique. We start with the handle low, and then we arc that through the cut to center. Just like that. The only downside to peeling with a Skew or peeling with a spindle roughing gouge, anything like that, or a bedan, look at the surface we have on our end grain fibers. It tears the fibers out massively. So that's why, to speed up Stuart's spindle turning, he wanted something that we could cut the end grain fibers clean with, as well as removing bulk material very fast. So take a look at these end grain fibers. We removed a lot of material, but it damaged the fibers here. It really tore those fibers out. It doesn't cut end grain well. These are all side grain tools that are made for that, unless with our Skew we do a slicing cut. And if we do a slice, I'm gonna switch hands here, we're gonna be using that long point down, and we're using the nose or the long point of our Skew, and we're gonna have to cut a fair amount of material off to cut through those torn fibers. Now let's take a look at this surface. So you can see it's cut it clean. We've got a little bit of chatter there from rubbing the bevel too hard, and it cut the fibers clean, but I can't remove a lot of material doing this. Doing these V-cuts, trying to take a heavy cut on this, you know, a 1/16 wide. You have to push into the tool really hard to get that to cut through those fibers. And if it's more than about a 1/16 or a 32nd or so, it's gonna start bottoming out and it'll stall out in the cut. It's not gonna actually do anything. So instead of doing 12 cuts with a Skew to get a clean end grain cut and remove material, using the 40/40 is gonna be a lot more efficient. And you know, we could use a spindle gouge. I've got a 3/8 here to do the same cut we were just doing with the 40/40, but let's show you what happens. So with the spindle gouge, same thing, flute closed. We open that up once we have support. That'll give us a really clean surface. Bevel riding cut with the nose slicing through these fibers, doing that slicing cut that our Skew is doing. It's doing the same cut, but we can take more material off with the spindle gouge. However, when I go to make a maximum cut of the size of the gouge, like a 3/8 pass here, you'll see what happens. So a 3/8 wide cut with a spindle gouge. It stalls out in the cut, it chips out the fibers, and because the wing is convex and the flute's a different profile, it's more shallow, it's gonna tear that fiber out on the side grain. It's gonna cut our end grain well, but the amount of pressure and force it took to make that cut was like 5 times as much. So let's try that again now with our 40/40. We'll get back on that bevel, and you can see it's much easier to make that exact same cut and have a clean surface. So let me just throw a tenon on this end here. We can throw this in our chuck so we can remove our revolving center, give you a little bit better close-ups of what's actually going on here. All right, so I've got this mounted in my chuck. Let's go ahead and remove this little nub here, and we'll do a few more cuts. Let's just show the difference between a Skew slicing cut and the 40/40. See what kind of end grain surface we get. Arcing that to center and slowing down as we get there. Let's just take a look at our surface. Nice and clean, a little bit of oscillating marks there from riding the bevel a little too hard, but clean cut end grain fibers. Now let's try that with the 40/40. Make sure I get my thumb behind the bevel to get us started. Open that flute up. Arcing that as well, and then we slow down as we get to center because that speed is just a little bit slower. Nice, super clean surface. So as far as the tool finish off both of these, they're pretty much identical. The only difference is I can do that while taking a 1/2 inch wide pass with the 40/40 versus the Skew. All right, let's take a cut here. We're just gonna create basically a cone-shaped taper to this, show you the clean surface we're getting. I'm gonna anchor it back here as well. Bump my speed back up to about 2,000. And if we stop the lathe real quick before we cut through that fiber there, as this tool's traveling through, you can see the wing is not cutting this side grain here well and cleanly, but it's leaving us a great end grain surface. And I don't care if this area here is not cut cleanly because it's going to be removed anyway. If you think about this tool, the nose is doing the slicing cut, so we have essentially a Skew on the front of the tool, and then that wing is a peeling cut like a Badan. We're using our Skew as a peeling cut, and that's just our bulk remover and our chip breaker. So that's a good way to think of this tool is we have our skew. It's a very delicate, fine cut that's left behind. And then the wing, that's gonna be the sledgehammer. That's gonna be breaking the chips up and clearing those out of our way. So if you take a look at that surface, nice and clean. Let's get rid of this little step we have here, and then now you can see a little bit better on the surface now with that step out of our way. But that would be a good enough surface to start sanding with 320. Honestly, a lot of guys that are doing production turning probably wouldn't even bother sanding that, especially on those square corner blanks like a baluster or a railing piece, column type project. But we get a super clean surface off the tool. Okay, one of the great things about this too is I really like using this to cut dovetails. So generally when I cut a tenon with my skew, I'm gonna peel cut it to size. That's gonna give me the angle I need, and then I'll always come in here and undercut and then clean up these end grain fibers with a slice. And then I have to come back in here and peel cut into that corner to get those fibers clean cut so I don't have a little burr on the inside that'll mess up my fit. So doing that's gonna give me that clean cut on the end grain, and I've got the right shape. But you can see there, I had to peel, then switch hands and do a couple of slicing cuts to clean that up. Let's try that now with the 40-40. So if I'm gonna be cutting a tenon with a straight wing, which is great for my dovetail, I'll have that nose to where it's pointed slightly undercut to fit against the chuck jaws, and then I'll be using that wing to peel that tenon. So I can do that exact same cut in a single pass and have just as clean cut of fiber. So we started there with that flute close, and once we got on the bevel, I opened it up, and then as I got to the diameter I needed, I closed that flute over to allow that nose to get down into the corner, and I've got a great tenon for mounting in my chuck jaws. So it's just a faster, more efficient tool. For certain use cases, obviously there's areas where the skew still excels for a lot of things. But let me just show you a couple of these cuts we can get, the surface finish we get off of a denser, harder wood like this Bocote here with the 40-40. And in the piece of material that I was turning, this is bone dry ash. This is super, super dry. And you can see how heavy of a cut we were taking with that gouge. So I'm gonna mount this up in my chuck here. Let's see how this looks on Bocote. Super hard, dense wood. You can see there where I got a little bit of a rub there at the very end trying to cut the nub off, but that surface is extremely smooth. I wouldn't even really bother sanding that at all. So the nose of this gouge cuts so clean. There's one other cut I want to show you before we move on to a bowl blank, but give this tool a shot. Try out the 40-40. I think it's a really good grind to throw in your toolkit. Obviously, it's not regrind all your gouges kind of thing. But let me grab another blank. But you can see that surface we got here, super clean. All right, so one last cut on a spindle project before we throw our bowl on. Let's talk about the shearing planing cut that we do with our skew. And if you know the skew, we ride on that bevel, shearing angles of 45, nice and easy across that surface. And that's going to give us a really good surface finish on our side grain. So you can see there, super clean cut. This surface is all done with a spindle roughing gouge. This is with the skew. And with the 40-40, we can replicate that same cut essentially. We're not going to get as good of a burnish off the bevel that we do with our skew. But if you ever need to, while you already have the 40-40 in your hand, you can shear plane with this as well. So I'm going to drop the handle just a little bit low, and we're going to bevel index just like we do with our skew on the side of that wing. And then we'll rotate that over, and again, that wing's at a 45 degree in relationship to that wood. And then we can bring that across and get that same shearing planing cut. And let's see what we got. So almost identical surfaces between the two tools. And if you've just cut your tenon, but you need to clean up a little surface on the side grain, you can go to that shearing planing cut to do the same thing. Let's get this cleaned up. We'll get the spindle blank off. We'll throw a bowl blank on and show you the different cuts with the 40-40. All right, so I've got a piece of wet honey locust on here. I'm just gonna show you how I remount this. I've got this in a chuck with a 4-prong drive center in my chuck jaws. Between my centers here, I've got tailstock support, and we're gonna be creating just a small recess here to remount this on our chuck jaws. So to do that with the 40-40, I'll bring this up to speed. We're about 800 RPM. I'm not gonna bother truing the blink up yet. We're just gonna be cutting a recess here to fit into our chuck jaws. And we're gonna scoop some of this material out. And then I'm going to come in from this side with that flute at about the 9 o'clock position. Do the same thing. And we're going to scoop out that material to give us access to be able to cut a recess. All right, so if you take a look at that, that's what we've got. We've got a nice dovetail recess cut in here for our chuck jaws. This area doesn't matter as long as it's short enough that it's not going to bottom out on the chuck jaws and not let that seat into there on that flat shoulder. All right, now that we have this mounted securely in the chuck, it's time to face off this blank here. This is all side grain orientation. Then we have the end grain here and here. So while we cut the side grain, just like we did on that spindle blank, we're going to be using the wing here. That's going to be peeling the surface, and it's not going to leave us a great surface. However, we will be coming through with a push cut to clean up those fibers and get a great clean cut. The one trick with this gouge in particular, because we have a straight wing, if we get in there and we have this flute too far open, we'll engage the entire wing, as opposed to a traditional grind gouge that has a curved wing to it. You're only engaging a small section of the gouge. But with this one here, if we come in here with that flute at about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or up, completely open, and you engage the entire wing, that's when this becomes a safety hazard. So make sure you have that flute closed over, and we're just going to be essentially scraping this as we get it flat, and then we can get a little more aggressive with it once it's trued up. And the trick here is just to glide this back and forth. We don't want to force this into the uneven workpiece because it'll kick the tool around. And we want to keep the nose of the gouge off the piece because we want that nice fresh edge for a finished surface later on. So we're just going to use the wing. See there, just scraping that back and forth, and it doesn't leave us a super clean surface. You can see how that's tearing that out, and that's going to be cutting with the wing as a peel cut. Once we start doing our curve, you can see the nose of the gouge will be pushing through, slicing these fibers, getting a clean surface. And I think we're about there as far as truing this up. And again, we don't want to push into the work surface. Let's just float this across the surface. That wing is peeling through the side grain and the nose is slicing the end grain fibers. And then we'll slow down right here at the end of our cut. I'm going to raise that and close that over so the nose slices through those fibers. So you can see we've got a really, really clean surface on our piece. Clean cut end grain fibers. That's a really good cut. Now let's bring our rest back around and we can start getting the shape in our bowl. And we'll show you that push cut here and what kind of surface we get left behind. So for this cut, we want to make sure the tailstock's far enough out of the way that we can manipulate the handle without getting bound up by it. There's been a few times where I've been making a cut and my handle hits my revolving center and stalls me out. So we want to make sure that we have enough room to swing the handle here. And we're going to start by just removing this big corner section of material here. Again, floating the bevel. So you can see just in a few cuts we removed all that bulk and we've got a super good edge, or sorry, a very clean surface as well. And hand position here, I don't want to have my hand on the top of the tool as I'm making this this push cut as I'm swinging this around the bowl. If I have my hand in front of the tool, it wants to prevent the tool from moving as it should. So I want to keep my hands wrapped around behind the tool, and I like to keep my thumb in the flute there. That's the way Stuart teaches it. If I have just my thumb in the flute, I'm basically doing the same thing as having my hand here. I'm basically acting as a brake, preventing the tool from making a good cut. So I want to be behind the tool, thumb in the flute, and then we're just going to be supporting that as we come around. So again, fingers behind, I'm not on the tool rest. If I sit here, that's going to be adding resistance to the tool, making the curve that I need. So I want to be floating the tool on the rest, and then just light, easy pressure on the bevel. I don't want to push in too hard. So after seeing a few of these cuts here, seeing the amount of bulk that's being removed with the surface we're getting left behind, the one thing that we can't show on camera is just how easy it is to make this cut. The amount of effort required to do that cut versus, draw scraping the surface. It's remarkable how much easier it is because I'm not partly putting any pressure in with my support end here on the tool, and I'm just holding this and stabilizing it. Generally, if I do a push cut with a traditional grind gouge, the nose is so much more rounded that tool kind of wants to float around and skate all over the place, and it's not as planted feeling as this does when I'm doing a bevel riding push cut. So once this is on the bevel, it's pretty much just locked in, and if you watch Ashley Harwood, Stuart Batty, a lot of times they'll just bring this around with one hand with their support hand, showing how controlled the cutting edge is. So you can see there just the efficiency, and I don't have to hold and really white knuckle grip this tool as I'm making that cut. I've just got my thumb on the top, got my fingers on the front of the flute there, and once I'm on that bevel support and I can open up the flute slightly, that peeling action just removes the chips very efficiently. And if we take a close-up look here at the surface, move the tool rest so you can see it's so wet in there, everything's dark, you can't see very well, but that's a very clean cut surface and all the end grain. As of right now, there's no tear out or any torn grain. I just want to smooth out any imperfections to minimize any sanding time I'll spend. Getting a little chatter out of the piece. We're getting nice and thin. But let's take tool rest out of the way here so we can see our surface. You can hear it's nice and thin. We've got an extremely clean surface. Once this is done, I'm just gonna lightly kiss it with a negative rake scraper, but the curve right here is extremely smooth with no tear out. So I'm just gonna breeze through with my bottoming gouge here just to get my final depth, get my final curve, and then we'll wrap this up. All right, so after negative rake scraping the inside, just a little bit, just to refine any little bumps or anything I had in there, this on the inside is gonna be done. So now I would just flip this around, remount this on a jam chuck, and then finish turning the foot for my calabash. But this is gonna go to show you guys how efficient that 40/40 can be when you use it properly, and more importantly, you sharpen it properly. So hopefully, this video is giving you a bunch of ideas how you can incorporate the 40/40 into your turning projects. I've really come to like the 40/40 a lot, and I've ground most of my gouges to this, with the exception of a couple of bowl gouges I use for shear scraping on the exterior bowls. That's the one downside to the 40/40s. Because the straight wing is there, I can't feather and shear scrape like I do with my regular convex winged gouges. So hopefully the 40/40 Raptor will help alleviate all those sharpening issues and frustrations that a lot of you guys have had, and I had myself. But if you guys have any questions, any comments, and if you've used the 4040 before or ever heard of it, go ahead and hit that like button. But as always, go ahead and leave comments down below for your fellow turners to see as well. And if you want to see more wood turning videos, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Hi, I'm Mike from Craft Supplies USA, and today we've got an exciting video for you. This video is going to be all about the 4040 grind. And if you don't know what the 4040 grind is, you're either sleeping under a rock, living under a rock, or you are a rock.